If you want to build muscle, you already know that the three main areas to focus on are eating, training, and sleeping. When you optimize these three things, you'll build plenty of muscle. On the other hand, if you don't train hard enough, you don't eat right, or you don't get enough sleep, you're going to find it a lot harder to build muscle. So most of your results will come down to these three factors. And the good news is that there are a couple tips and hacks that you can use to optimize each of these three factors to really speed up muscle growth, and these hacks are backed by scientific evidence. And the very first hack, undervalued hack, that most people have never even tried, is using bands and chains to improve resistance curves. You see, many exercises have a specific sticking point. For example, on the bench press, the sticking point tends to happen after the bar comes off the chest right before the halfway point. That's the point where the exercise is the hardest and requires the most strength. Meanwhile, other points like the lockout portion, for example, require much less strength. To give another example, during the squat, the sticking point typically occurs near the halfway point where the thigh is at about a 30-degree angle to the floor. And most exercises have these kinds of sticking points. So this is important because when you fail to complete another rep, you might be under the impression that you've maxed out and you can't do more reps because your muscles are too fatigued to further produce movement. But in reality, the muscle might not be fully fatigued just yet. Instead, it might just be fatigued enough to where you cannot complete a specific part of the movement, which could be referred to as your sticking point. Luckily, you can use resistance bands and chains to help with this. They allow you to change the resistance curve of an exercise, which means that chains and bands can make certain parts of the movement more or less challenging. For example, during the squat, the resistance bands and chains provide more resistance the closer you get to lockout, which is the part of the movement that's past the sticking point, so you will more likely be able to handle a heavier resistance as you get closer and closer to lockout, and that's exactly what chains and bands can provide. Not only will this lead to a more effective muscle-building stimulus, but it can also help you gain strength more effectively, as shown by multiple studies. For example, 2 studies show that bench pressing and squatting with bands or chains builds more strength than doing these exercises without bands or chains. 12. In another 2016 paper published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research, researchers found that more advanced lifters tend to benefit the most from using bands and chains. 13. Beginners, on the other hand, many times don't have the required coordination and the rate of force development to use bands and chains effectively, which is why if you're a beginner, you're better off getting accustomed to weight training in general, before adding bands and chains. And for those of you that are advanced, keep in mind, bands and chains don't improve the effectiveness of all your exercises. For example, an exercise like the leg press, even though it has its fair share of problems, it generally already has a good resistance curve, so there's really not much of a point in adding chains or bands to a leg press. The next muscle building hack is to train either later in the afternoon or early evening. Now, if you have a solid morning routine, there's nothing wrong with that, but you should know that your body has an internal clock, known as the circadian rhythm. Due to this circadian rhythm, you're stronger, faster, and you have a more beneficial hormonal status for exercise at certain times of the day. If you take advantage of this by training at the right time, you can boost your gym performance and your progress. And we have evidence of this. For example, a 2016 study compared the effectiveness of a 24-week workout program, where one group completed their workouts between 6:30 and 10 o'clock in the morning. Meanwhile, the other group worked out between 4:30 p.m. and 8 o'clock at night. The results showed that those who trained in the evening gained much more muscle, as you can see in the graph on the screen. 2. On top of that, another study that specifically examined bodybuilders, who either trained before 10 a.m. or after 6 p.m. also found that the bodybuilders that worked out in the evening